in the UK. The British Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, has quit. Let's go straight to 10 Downing Street. Nick Robertson is there. What do we know? And this has just happened in the last few minutes.
Absolutely, Robin. Hot off the press, if you will. Interestingly, no sign of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister was expected to leave here round about now to go to Downing Street to brief Parliament on what she thought she had agreed with the Cabinet on the next steps on Brexit at that sequestered meeting at a country house in Chequers on Friday. This morning, or over hours last night, David Davis, the Brexit Secretary, resigns. The question was, would anyone else go? A junior minister went with him, and people were waiting to see which way Boris Johnson and some other key influential Brexiteers, people who are pushing for a strong Brexit. Davis, in leaving, criticised the Prime Minister, saying she could no longer deliver essentially that tough Brexit, that it was going to leave Britain and its negotiating position in a weak position, that the government wouldn't have the powers that Theresa May said it would get through Brexit. So Boris Johnson now resigning will come as a double hammer blow, but it will ring so much louder than that blow of David Davis leaving. Why? Because Boris Johnson has been a very big figure in opposition to Theresa May over the course she has been taken on Brexit. He is a figure who's likely to be in a position, just by the momentum of him leaving, following on from David Davis, to perhaps draw other MPs, possibly cabinet members with him, and potentially trigger a vote of no confidence in Prime Minister Theresa May. It would require 48 votes. The 1922 backbench committee would be in a position, potentially therefore, later today, to call for a vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. And this would put a big question mark over the course that Brexit would take, and not just the future leadership of the country and the possibility of a general election. None of that is happening yet, but this is the sound that resounds around with Boris Johnson's resignation. We have to see how it plays out, but this will be a concern for a lot of people within Theresa May's Conservative Party.
Okay, so there is certainly a lot to pick apart here, because is this then a power play, a power move from Boris Johnson, who we know is ambitious? More about that than Brexit, or do you think this is also really a lot of internal division in that cabinet about which way to go with Brexit?
You're right, Robin. It's hugely complicated, and there are many issues at stake and at play here. One of the sort of internal British issues, if you will, was a recent vote in Parliament for there to be a third runway at Heathrow. Why is this significant to what we're talking about at Brexit? Because Boris Johnson's constituency is directly affected. He said that he would oppose any third runway at Heathrow, but the day the vote came, he was, not inexplicably, but he was on a sudden trip to Afghanistan to meet with low-level Afghan officials, so he wouldn't have to vote. In essence, he didn't vote with the way he said he would do. That undermined his credibility. So here he is in a position of having his credibility questioned again. If David Davis has resigned, can Boris Johnson really maintain credibility, having said what we understand him to say, which was some very fruity language, to use that expression, about how he described how bad the deal Theresa May was, the one that she was putting before the Cabinet at Chequers on Friday, and what would have to be done to be able to sell it to the public. I won't use the words he used, but it was very descriptive, and it clearly indicated that he didn't like what she was putting on the table, and we hadn't heard over the weekend from Boris Johnson, which raised that question of which way he was going to go. Does this now create momentum for other key big figures within the Brexit movement to follow on? One key backbencher, Jacob Rees-Mogg, had earlier today indicated that this wasn't the moment. Will he change his mind? As we know, politicians can read the wind and will shift with it on occasion. Is that what Boris Johnson has done? Is that what others will do? That's the question right now.
Yeah, and the big question is just how vulnerable Theresa May is, and is this her cabinet, her government falling apart, or will she be able to hold it together? Just stay with us. Stand by, Nick Robertson. I want to go to David Sanger. He joins us also from London. He's CNN's political and national security analyst. You also work for the New York Times. David, good to speak to you. We were going to talk to you about President Trump's trip to Europe, but interestingly now, there is going to be this domestic political drama playing out while the US president is in town later on in the week. I mean, it's certainly, you know, rocky waters, isn't it?
You know, it is, but it may actually play to the president's advantage in an odd way. I mean, think of this. Until a few moments ago, or until this morning, the focus was going to be on the president arriving here, the balloon showing him as a baby flying over central London, the president staying out of the country, and him being the focus of the protests. Now, he's in a position where he's dealing with a weakened Theresa May. The two of them do not exactly get along. He has no particular reason right now to strike any particular deals or even work on his relationship with her, because he's probably thinking in the back of his mind that she may not survive this.
So that's going to be interesting. And what does it mean about Boris Johnson being out? Because there had actually been quite a rapprochement between Boris Johnson and the US president.
There had been a bit of one, and I think the president sort of liked the fact that Boris Johnson was this big, brash, fast-talking, sometimes vividly talking politician.
Fruity, I think, was the word Nick Robertson used.
Yes. Who does that remind you of, right? So of all of the people in the May cabinet who you think the president might get along with, Boris Johnson, in terms of personality, not politics, would have been it. Also, the president has fundamentally favored Brexit because he's not a big fan of negotiating with the European Union. He wants to negotiate with countries individually, bilaterally.
And clearly this is a domestic political issue, but the issue of Brexit has wider implications, not just for Europe, but also for the US.
It does, in a few different ways. I mean, first of all, as I said, the president would, if anything, break up Europe more. I mean, he is reported to have urged President Macron to leave the European EU as well, right? So, I mean, at that point, if you didn't have Britain and France in it, why bother, right, with the rest of it?
Well, that's Donald Trump's probably point of view, is what you're saying.
Yes, right. That would have been his point of view. So he is not exactly a big fan of the EU. He's heading into this NATO meeting in just a few days. That's going to be as contentious as the G7 meeting was a few weeks ago, just before he went to Singapore. In the course of that, he's going to be pressing individual countries to go contribute more to their defense. It's probably going to be a pretty difficult set of meetings. So having Theresa May fighting her own problems here in London is not entirely bad news for him.
And what does it mean then for NATO, for European cooperation, for the whole European experiment? We're seeing a very, and I mixed my metaphors earlier, I mean, it's rocky ground, rough waters, whatever you want to call it. I mean, this is a very pivotal moment in history as to where this alliance goes. And NATO, and now having a weak government in London doesn't help, does it?
It doesn't help to have it. I mean, we've been through British crises before. We haven't been through a NATO crisis quite like this one before. I mean, this is deeper than the Suez crisis that, rocked the alliance back in the 50s. This is, at this point, a fundamental question about what NATO's mission is and whether or not its traditional mission of containment of the Soviet Union and then Russia is one that its largest member, the United States, still supports. And on this issue, you've seen a great division between the president, who seems to be an apologist for Vladimir Putin's actions. You heard him the other day at that rally saying, oh, everybody says he's a KGB member, but don't think about that. Just, he's just like everyone else. He's just fine. And the rest of the NATO members thinking about how they go reinforce along their Russian borders and fend off cyber attacks from Russia. So you've seen a very fundamental split. I was just with a group of Europeans at a conference over the weekend. I have never seen them both more dispirited and more questioning of American leadership than I heard in the past few days, and dreading this NATO meeting.